LOWcast. Be informed about the issues that matter.
Hello, I'm Karen Clements, Deputy CEO and Director of Campaigns at Low. Welcome to LOWcast and to our guest, Shevaun Haviland, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. Welcome, Shevaun.
Hello.
It's been 4 years since the UK officially left the European Union, and the dust is very slowly settling after the Brexit earthquake. Last year, the political deadlock around the Northern Ireland Protocol was broken by the Windsor Framework Agreement, followed by some encouraging signs of normalisation of EU-UK relations, with the UK government rejoining important EU programmes such as Horizon Europe and Copernicus, to the relief of many in the business and scientific communities. But as this dust settles, it's becoming increasingly clear that Brexit is harming the British economy. Trading with the EU has never been harder and is only likely to get harder still. Last year, the costs of regulatory divergence were added to the cost of not being in the customs union. And in January, further controls were added at the border, and there's further pain to come in April with the introduction of physical checks. What can be done to improve future trade flows? Will a new UK government and a new European Commission and Parliament enjoy a more open dialogue? Will their respective visions of future EU-UK relations align? And what should the role of the UK business community be in achieving closer cooperation with its closest trading partners? To discuss these questions, we're joined by Shevaun Haviland, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. Welcome, Shevaun, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, lovely to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So you took the helm of the BCC, which I think represents around 50,000 businesses across the UK. Is that right?
That's right.
In April 2021, a time of exceptional upheaval and uncertainty for your members, what with COVID restrictions and the post-Brexit trading arrangements. What was your approach? How did you set out to support them? And what are they telling you about the trading conditions on the ground right now?
It's been a really tough post-Brexit time for businesses. As the Chambers of Commerce, 53 chambers around the UK, 79 British chambers around the world, we are here to support our members, to bring them together and to be their voice, to make sure that the UK is the best place to start, grow and invest in a business. The EU, as you say, rightly, is our largest trading partner. It accounts for 42% of the UK's trade. We have published a report every year since Brexit. So TCA 3 years on, it was on December the 23rd. Always makes for a tricky Christmas. And we recognised, of course, when Brexit came in, that businesses would have challenges getting used to the new rules and regulations. But I think we all thought they would get used to it, you know? And actually, what we've seen in this year's report just gone, TCA 3 years on, is that 60% of businesses trading with the EU have told us that it's now more difficult than it was a year ago, which was actually quite surprising and very concerning. I guess the reasons that they were saying that was a couple of things. So we've definitely seen positive move in the right direction with the Windsor framework coming in. It's definitely improved the feeling of the relationship. And we were in Brussels in November with the team meeting the Commission. You know, we had some great meetings there. But actually, what businesses are finding practically on the ground is there's still a lot of barriers, and you know, even if they feel like they're doing the right paperwork every month, it's being applied slightly differently depending on which EU market they're going into. So it's still tricky. They're still trying to find their way around current rules. And of course, there's a whole new slew of rules and regs coming in the year ahead.
So, and it's not just the issue of extra compliance documents or whether it's a customs certificate or a safety certificate. There's also the issue of regulatory divergence. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between those, you know, that the wider implications for your members?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about goods, moving goods. 80% of firms who responded to the survey effectively said they didn't know what was coming down the track. 80%. And that's a huge concern. And, there has been paperwork exporting to the EU that's been in place now for a couple of years, but actually not if you're importing back into the UK. So there are now going to be a new set of rules around that. And of course, any divergence in packaging or product means that as a UK producer, you have to make something for the UK and something else for the EU. So that's effectively, in some cases, well, in all cases, it's a huge increase in cost.
Absolutely. So with, as you say, things looking set to become even more complicated, at least in the short term, what are you talking to the government about? I mean, I would just say that you have you're a very rare person in that you have extensive experience of both government and business, and you've been successful in both. So that gives you a unique insight into how they both work and how they should communicate with one another, or how they can best work together. So what's the BCC saying to government about how we should move forward?
I think the key word you used there, Karen, was communication. I think that is really something we can see great improvements on to make things simpler. So, for example, what we'd like to see is for us to work with our EU partners to make sure that every EU nation has simple guidance and the same guidance for bringing people and products into those markets. So they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like. And to make sure we're working closely on changes, on regulations and changes, so that there's minimum disruption. So, for example, it's still, as I've outlined, very unclear to business what the new import checks are going to mean for them. We've seen already, so end of January, new import checks came in, but actually the physical checks don't come in until April. It'd be interesting to hear what you're hearing from your side of the pond, but we're already hearing that the EU vets, who now, of course, have to sign off huge numbers of food and drink products coming into the UK, aren't actually really sure about how the new paperwork works. So, never mind that they probably have other jobs they were meant to be doing. So communications and simpler guidance, definitely. And then I think there are some discussions with the EU that have begun around youth mobility and improving business travel, getting people in and out and around. I think youth mobility schemes would make a huge difference to help on the labour market front. And of course, our young people, right, who want to travel and work in other countries. You asked about future governments, and if we were saying, if we could be more ambitious, more politically ambitious, maybe, we would like to see two other things. So one would be around VAT. So as you know, Norway, for example, have a better VAT regime with the EU than the UK do. So a supplementary deal there that exempts smaller firms from having to have fiscal representation in each EU nation would be a big cost saving. And then the other would be on food and drink products, so reducing the amount of paperwork, moving those sort of products around, and sort of mutual recognition of professional qualifications. Those are, we fully recognise, bigger things to work out, but we do know we can see things coming down the track. So we know that, for example, we need to link our two emissions trading schemes so that we don't get to 2026 and we've already got a problem. So I guess there's three things there on communication and movement of people, and maybe two or three sort of bigger pieces on regulation and side deals.
In terms of, for example, the VAT issues and the issues around mutual recognition, those can be resolved, as I understand it, within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and that's, or rather, the implementation of that agreement is up for review in 2026. Now, most officials that you talk to on either side of the channel suggest that it's just going to be a very routine technical review, and pretty much along the same lines as the discussions that are happening at the moment between the various trade committees. I suppose if there's political will to do something more ambitious, then that could happen. You mentioned a trip you made to Brussels to visit various officials. Did you get the impression there from any of the commissioners that there was an ambition to go beyond a mere review of the implementation, or are they playing their cards close to their chest?
I actually have to say I was quite surprised by. I mean, it took a little bit of warming up, but I would say there was a view that we could have more political ambition. That was the good thing. It was quite a day. It was a day after Lord David Cameron had just been given his new gig as Foreign Secretary. So it was quite a interesting moment. I think there was political ambition. Of course, the commissions that we saw recognise that they have a election coming up soon. So, that's TBD. Whereas the officials were at some pains to point out it was indeed a review of the implementation of the TCA. So I definitely went away with a positive feeling. And I think what we've seen with the Windsor framework and Horizon and some of the other recent negotiations around, Stormont returning have been really positive. So, I feel like we're in a fairly good place on it. I guess you might tell me, in fact, actually, if you think the elections coming up quite soon will be positive or not.
Well, it's an opportunity for a reset, isn't it? No matter what the shift may be in terms of the Parliament and the Commission, and obviously the word on the street is that there will be a shift to the right in the European Parliament, that will, the new Parliament will take its place in September, a new Commission probably by end of November, December. Whatever happens, I don't think that will shift the basic commitment to the single market, to peace and prosperity, and indeed to a Green Deal, because clearly there's a backlash at the moment. And yes, those that are going to suffer need to be managed and need to be supported, etc. But I think that the EU just cannot afford to row back on its commitments and to not meet its targets. So come the autumn, we have a new UK government, we have a new Commission, and it's an opportunity, as I said, for a change of mood, which can be just as important as the actual policies or negotiations or discussions. And I do remember back in 1997 when Tony Blair came to power, it was a total sea change in relations between the EU and the UK. And obviously we were obviously very much members then, but the levels of cooperation and positivity meant that things could be achieved and discussions could be had that weren't happening prior to that. So I think, as you say, there's an opportunity within the TCA to make it work as well as it possibly could, but also to start talking about issues that the UK and the EU leaders are just not talking about yet. You mentioned, emissions and climate change. That's just they're not having those discussions at the moment. So it's an opportunity to look at things in a different way. I know that you mentioned your report mentions the concerns of lots of British businesses around the carbon border adjustment mechanism. That's something which, as I understand it, the EU hasn't really started talking to third countries about that and about their approach. So why not start with the UK? Big carbon market, and that could possibly be an opportunity to lead on to all sorts of other issues.
Absolutely.
But obviously, there's a huge role that the business community can play in the future of, and should play arguably in the future of EU and UK relationships, the relations. How do you see it from your perspective, whether it's the British Chambers of Commerce or indeed the other business or representative organisations in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely want to be and should be part of whatever's next, part of the solution. We have to be realistic, the deal created a framework we have to operate in with political ambition. And of course, we talk about in the UK the changes we want to see. Well, it has to be in the EU's interest too, which I sometimes think may be slightly forgotten. So we absolutely have a role in feeding in intelligence, data, research, stories of what businesses are facing, so that as things are moving, as things are changing, we can really help get them right. Because you mentioned earlier that I've worked for government and in business, and what you see is a different way that they work, and that's okay because they're different machineries, but government often don't necessarily always fully understand what happens at the end of the at the end of the trail when it comes to implementation on the ground, and that's what we really need to help everybody understand. And there are great organisations like the Domestic Advisory Group that we sit on UK EU relations, as well as organisations like Eurochambre, who we are going to team with to set out common principles for the development of the relationship. So it's absolutely crucial that business have a clear voice in what's next.
So you mentioned the 25 ambassadors from across the EU. There was always a tendency, or there is an instinct to say, well, we need to beef up, obviously, our bilateral relations, possibly at the expense of our relations with the European Union. Is that something that you've pursued, or that you see as important, that the UK should really be engaging not only bilaterally with the member states, but also building alliances with third countries like Switzerland or Norway, who have arguably better deals than we do, in order to learn from them?
Well, we are indeed a third country now, so I think we need to recognise that. And I think we do need to work with other countries, both in Europe, on the continent, but also the US, for example, or other large partners for the EU. So we do need to do that. I think we can absolutely work bilaterally. We run the UK French Business Forum with our French colleagues. We have great discussions there. We probably have to be a little bit careful that we don't want to be seen to be doing deals with individual countries against the benefit, against what the EU want to see. But I think those conversations always help the wider negotiations.
Absolutely. And in terms of actual presence in Brussels, for example, which you could argue you can't beat. We did a report a while back called Mind the Gap in 2021 as well, which looked at the gap between the UK and the EU, particularly because of its new status as third country, and the sort of an unwillingness or a difficulty, I suppose it was, to recognise that new status. And we looked at other countries like the US and their level of representation, given the size of their investment in the EU as a market, and it was, it massively overshadowed the investment that British business was making in the EU, in terms of the numbers of meetings it was having, in terms of the levels of representation in Brussels, in terms of the different think tanks or business community representations there. Now, arguably, for the whole time that there was a disagreement around the Northern Ireland Protocol, things were highly political, and obviously I know that, and rightly, business doesn't often like to get involved in the politics, so it was a difficult time to really be there. But do you sense, maybe amongst your members or amongst other, organisations that you talk to, that there is a willingness to physically get back to Brussels and to start engaging on the EU's turf?
Well, firstly, I was really delighted with the reception that we got when we came over in November. We not just saw the Commission and our British chambers, but also a number of our business members who have presence there, from telecoms to food and drink and so on. And we run an organisation in the UK called the Business Council. It's some of the UK's biggest corporates. In fact, they're from all over the world. And if I think about that group, they have huge operations in the EU. I mean, we do. So we absolutely have to ensure that we have the presence, and because we felt very welcomed back into Brussels, and that people were saying, "Oh, it's great to have British business's voice here." It felt like the right moment for us to do a lot more on the ground there, and both our members across the country and our business council. It is so crucial for this economy, and I say this to this government and the opposition. If we are going to grow our economy, we are one market. There are 190 odd markets out there, and the EU's our biggest. We have to focus on getting businesses to export, to businesses to think export first rather than domestic market. And in the UK, about 10% of businesses export, which I think is concerningly low. 60% of chamber members export. It's absolutely, at the heart of what we do. And being here and across the EU as a chamber network is absolutely the thing we need to have.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. And Shevaun, thank you so much for your time today. I wish you and your members all the very best in this, in the effort to make things easier for them to do business where they want to do it, when they want to do it. Thank you so much, Shevaun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great to be here.